Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and we have a great panel. This is the legislative update session. We're going to be learning a lot about what's happening right now in Trenton, and just want to make a mention that all of you that are participating in this session do qualify for one New Jersey Urban and Community Forestry CEU, so just keep that in mind. So what we're going to do over the next hour or so is engage with policy leaders on what state government is doing to combat climate change, and some of that through the regulatory reform efforts of New Jersey Pact, which is protect against climate threats, and forestry stewardship. And also we'll hear about some of the continuing work being done, especially through Ancheck, of reducing plastic pollution. Our speakers for this session are Tom Gilbert. He is the co-executive director of the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Ed Patasnick, the executive director of New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and Deanie Checco, who's a project director rather, at Ancheck. I'm Steve Souza. I'm on the board of trustees of Ancheck, and I'm happy to be with you this morning, this afternoon. I want to first, give some big thank yous to our various sponsors, including our gold sponsor, PSE&G, our silver sponsor, Ocean Wind 1, and then our bronze sponsors, Atlantic City Electric, New Jersey American Water, the Clean Energy Program of New Jersey, and Solar Landscape. So thank you to our event sponsors. Deanie, you want to forward? So as you know, Ancheck, we are all about making sure that what's happening in local and state government is the best that can be done to protect our resources and protect our communities. We have our efforts really look at setting priorities, whether they're involved with combating climate crisis, advancing environmental justice, or ending plastic pollution, or a variety of other measures and issues that are specific, to our day-to-day needs of having a real healthy New Jersey. From my perspective, a lot of that pertains to resilience from stormwater-related problems, whether it's flooding, water quality impacts, et cetera. Go to the next slide. Our mission statement is pretty clear. We've just updated it, by the way. We had a board meeting a week or so ago, and I'll just read this through because I think it's something that everybody should be aware of, that the mission of Ancheck is really to promote local action to protect and restore New Jersey's natural resources and to ensure healthy communities for today and the future. So, our efforts are definitely locally based, but definitely have effects on a statewide basis. Ancheck advances its mission by engaging in equitable and inclusive practices through leadership, partnerships, education, advocacy for strong public policy, and in support of environmental commissions, public officials, and communities throughout New Jersey. So it's, having this session on legislative update goes hand in hand with what we're all about on a day-to-day basis. You can go ahead to the next slide. And yeah, your local support really empowers local impact, and that's what we're all about. Environmental Congress is just one of those means by which we can bring folks together, to share stories, share experiences, learn from each other, but at the same time, increase our ability to go out there and again make our local communities and New Jersey as a whole better environmentally. And go ahead. Election day is Tuesday, November 8th. Don't forget that. Voter registration deadlines are coming up very quickly, October 18th. And then there is the early voting period that extends from the 29th of October through the 6th of November. And your mail-in ballot deadline, don't forget about this, is November the 1st. So this is how our voices get heard statewide. We'll emphasize again that, if you want to be part of the process, you have to be involved in the process. And voting is definitely one of the key ways to have our voices heard. Go ahead. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to have a little bit of Q&A that we'll cover at the end of each speaker's presentation, and then we'll have an extended Q&A opportunity at the close of the third presentation. We will be monitoring questions in the background, so if you have a question, please type that into the chat, which we'll be monitoring. If you do have any problems, call Liz. She will take care of just about anything under the sun for you, okay? And as noted at the beginning, this is being recorded, and the recording of this session will be posted at a later date to Ancheck's YouTube channel. So make sure that you get that link. That link will be sent to all the attendees, and then share that link so people can see, what we did during this session, and learn a little bit more, even though they weren't perhaps able to attend this session along with us. So advance to the next one, please.
I think this is the end of this, and I am going to stop share and switch over to Tom's presentation.
Okay, so while that's booting up, I'm going to give Tom Gilbert a quick introduction. He has served since 2015 as the campaign director for energy, climate, and natural resources. And in this role, he has led statewide Rethink Energy New Jersey. And that's a campaign to stop unneeded fossil fuel infrastructure, including Penny's pipeline, which I was involved in fighting that as well, and to advance landmark new clean energy and climate policies. He previously served as the Senior Conservation Finance Director with the Trust for Public Land. He's also served as the Director of Eastern Forest Conservation for the Wilderness Society, and as the Executive Director of the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut Highlands Coalition. Tom earned his BA in History and his Master's in Natural Resource Planning from the University of Vermont. And he was a founding board member of the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and he currently serves on its board. So, Tom, thank you very much for being with us today. I'm going to mute myself and let you take over. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Steve, for the introduction. Thanks to Ancheck for asking me to be a part of this panel. It's always good to be with my my friend and colleague at Patasnick. And what I was asked to talk about, really three things: the New Jersey Forest Task Force, and I certainly will talk about that in relation to climate change, which I know is a focus, and then talk a little bit about energy issues, both kind of the two sides of the coin, sort of the dirty energy projects that we need to prevent from sort of furthering our build out of unneeded fossil fuel infrastructure, as well as how we're moving to clean energy. And I'll talk about solar in particular, with sound siting, so that we can meet our clean energy goals while also continuing to meet our open space and our natural resource protection goals. So let me start with the New Jersey Forest Task Force. So you're probably aware that there's been long simmering debate and discussion in New Jersey over the management of our public forest lands. Most recently, last year, Senate Environment Committee, our great champion, Chairman Bob Smith, convened a extensive hearing on forest management issues. There were, 4 or 5 different bills that were up for discussion at that point, and it was sort of a lengthy and contentious hearing, and lots of different perspectives and passionately held perspectives. Following that hearing, I think the senator went to a strategy, a playbook that he's used on other issues, and he decided to convene a task force to bring together the various interested, parties and stakeholders to see if they could hammer out some agreement and come back to him. So that the task force got underway earlier this year. These are just some of the remarks that the senator made when the task force was established, just to give you a sense of the kinds of issues that he was focused on and asked us to focus on. Of course, the role that forests play in mitigating, climate change, sequestering carbon dioxide, but also providing important wildlife habitat, clean drinking water, healthy soils. All those issues were really kind of on the radar screen. The concern about wildfires, of course, with what we've seen, the horrific wildfires in other parts of the country. Unfortunately, New Jersey and sort of the Northeast haven't experienced that same level of wildfire yet. But then it's something the senator is concerned about and wanted us to take a look at. And so again, the task force was convened to discuss these issues and seek consensus solutions. No small task, right? Consensus solutions that could form the basis for future legislation. So next slide, please. This is the mission of the task force. One important thing to note, we're focused on public forest lands, not on all forests, not on private forests, land management issues. So looking at our public forests, again, with a focus on climate change, preventing forest fires, improving ecosystems, soil and water quality, to take feedback from any interested party and to compile a report on both consensus and non-consensus issues with respect to forest stewardship. Next slide. So just to talk a little bit about the task force process, there were 4 organizations asked for individuals to co-chair the task force. In addition to me, the other co-chairs include Andy Bennett, who is a consulting forester and officer with the New Jersey Forestry Association, Eileen Murphy with New Jersey Audubon, and Anjali Ramos with the New Jersey Sierra Club. So the 4 of us have been gotten to know each other quite well, spent a lot of time together throughout the course of the year. One of the first things we did is we met with the Beach Access Task Force, which is a similar group that the senator had convened and had good results. So we kind of learned from them in terms of how they approach that process. We put out an open invitation for any interested citizen and or organization to participate. We've had over 200 people participating in the process. We've been holding bi-weekly meetings via Zoom. We've had several presentations from key New Jersey DEP staff. We also invited some academic experts to come speak with us, including one, Professor Bill Mumma, who some people might have heard of, is kind of one of the leading proponents of the concept of pro-forestation, which is the approach to allowing forests to mature essentially for their carbon benefits. And so there's emerging research that suggests that allowing maturing forests to continue to mature is one effective strategy to enhance carbon sequestration in our forests. So we had a panel with Professor Mumma and others discussing that issue. We've also opened it up to proposals from task force members, and we received scores of them, right? So kind of a very bottom up in terms of letting task force members bring forward ideas for the task force to consider. We've had multiple surveys. So they've been very good discussions, at times heated, but it's been very civil, constructive, airing of different ideas and perspectives. At this point, I can't say too much because we're still sort of in process. There's nothing that's been formally decided or released by the task force. But I will say that we're working right now on a conceptual framework, and we think there are some areas of high level agreement. At this point, we feel like we're more likely to find, again, because our charge is consensus, or at least, very broad agreement. And we're finding it's more possible to get agreement on some higher level principles and processes that really need to be put in place for our public forest lands. And, things like more comprehensive science-based planning across our public lands with sound, public input into that process, which is really not something that's happened sort of, system-wide, right, at the landscape level for our public lands. I think things like a more formal process that would govern how individual forest management plans are reviewed. And we're certainly, we've talked a lot about kind of the climate dimensions of our forests. We're discussing things like establishing ecological reserves that, among other things, again, would kind of tie back to that proforestation concept of identifying areas of maturing forests that would be largely, set aside to continue to mature and reach old growth status, for the carbon and many other benefits that those types of forests can provide. We're discussing issues like the need to have a more intensive effort to deal with invasive species on our public lands. Talking about issues like too many deer and the impacts that deer overpopulation have on our forests, and a significant lack of forest regeneration in many areas that is a real threat to the carbon and many other values that our forests provide if we don't get a handle on it. So I think that's about as much as I can say at this point in the process, but we are on track and working to have a report to the legislature by the end of the year, and we're hopeful that there'll be very broad agreement around the items that come forward from the task force, and that it will lead to and help to resolve some of the I was going to say logjam, it's a bad pun, that we had in the last legislative hearing on these issues last year, and that we can find a way forward. And it's really critical, just again, back to the climate connection. We know that New Jersey's forests and other lands sequester the equivalent of about 8% of the state's annual greenhouse gas emissions each year. And the state is counting on, in order to reach its climate goals, to not only maintain that 8% of carbon that's stored across forests and other lands, but to actually increase the amount of carbon sequestered across various land types by 33%. As part of the strategy to meet the targets under the Global Warming Response Act. So, next slide. Let me just spend a couple minutes on the energy issues. And as I mentioned at the outset, really thinking about the two sides of this coin that, we know to, again, deal with climate change and meet our emissions, critical emissions targets, we have to both be careful about not building out unneeded fossil fuel infrastructure. That's going to, further sort of tie our dependence into fossil fuels over a time frame where we need to be transitioning away from fossil fuels. We also need to very aggressively build out, clean sources of energy with sound siting. On the dirty energy side of the coin, there's one project that it's not the only one, but one project that's very much in debate right now is called the Regional Energy Access Expansion Project. It's a project from Williams Transco, which is one of the biggest, pipeline developers in the world. It's an expansion of an existing interstate gas pipeline running from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. In terms of climate impacts, by the company and FERC's own analysis, it would result in over 16 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. So very significant climate impacts. And then in terms of in New Jersey, there are a number of compressor stations. There would be a new compressor station in West Deptford, Gloucester County. There would be an expanded compressor station in Branchburg. And there's concerns associated with air pollution impacts from those compressor stations, and including impacts in already overburdened communities. So there are environmental justice concerns and considerations as well. And then one thing I would call your attention to as it relates to this project and other fossil fuel projects in New Jersey is that just within the past year, the BPU released a gas capacity analysis done by an outside firm, London Economics International, that basically concluded that New Jersey has more than enough gas capacity, more than enough, pipeline capacity to meet the needs over the next 10 years, and beyond. And that's even under peak conditions, right? Like the most extreme cold weather conditions when demand for gas peaks. Even under those very extreme weather conditions, there's more than enough gas capacity. So that study really flies in the face of this regional energy access expansion project, because there are many New Jersey gas distribution companies that are signed on, have contracts to receive capacity through this project. And it really doesn't square with the finding of BPU's analysis. And so, fortunately, the BPU itself and the New Jersey ratepayer advocate, they intervened in the docket for this project at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they lodged this study in the FERC docket and said, FERC needs to consider this analysis. And, they pointed out how it contrasts with the project rationale, right, and the stated purpose and need for the project. So that's really significant. We give huge kudos to the BPU and the Rate Council for stepping in here and both defending. It's about defending the ratepayers of New Jersey from having to pay for a project that isn't needed and is contrary to the state's clean energy goals. And so, at this point, we're waiting to see what happens at FERC, and we're hopeful that FERC is listening and will reject the project. So that's sort of on the dirty energy side of the coin. A couple of things that I wanted to call your attention to. On the clean energy side of the coin, I know there's another session focused on wind specifically. So just to talk a little bit about what's happening on solar energy, and of course, New Jersey has had a longstanding, solar energy industry, and New Jersey's ranked 7th nationally in installed solar. So just last year, the legislature passed a bill, again, Senator Smith spearheaded that, to create a new utility scale solar incentive program. And so the utility scale, these are the larger grid scale projects. And so this is a new program to try to incentivize more of those large grid scale projects. In the spring, the BPU had put out a straw proposal and had a stakeholder session around that new incentive program. And also, as per the legislation, did a straw proposal and stakeholder process around the siting provisions under that bill. So we and others advocated that absolutely we need to continue to grow solar energy and incentivize these types of projects, but we need to do it in a way that's also mindful of the state's longstanding open space, farmland, natural resource protection goals, and the work that still remains to be done, right? It's not completed. And so the legislation stipulated a series of restrictions on siting, trying to both identify places where these larger utility scale projects should not go, but leaving open significant areas where they could. And so in terms of farmland, for example, the legislation stipulated that for the most part, the best soils are prime soils, are statewide important soils in the agricultural development areas, which are those areas that the state and counties have identified as most important for the future, future ag production and viability in the state. That those prime statewide important soils would largely be restricted from these utility scale solar projects, with some exceptions. So there was an exception for the first 2.5% of those lands right off the bat are basically exempt. And that's probably about 5,000 acres. And then they created a waiver process so that developers beyond that 2.5% could seek a waiver if it was in the public interest and go to the BPU. But they put a cap on that of not more than 5% of the best soils within any county ADA could be waived. And that if that entire 5% were to be developed, it would be about 9,500 acres. So, to some degree, that's sort of a compromise, right? It's an effort to both allow for some level of solar development while trying to, protect the lion's share, right? The significant, the vast majority of the best soils on our best farmland. So, and there are other restrictions in there as well. There's some protections against clearing forests, which the DEP still needs to clarify exactly how they're going to define that. Restrictions on the Highlands Preservation Area within the Pinelands, freshwater wetlands, etc. Again, all of that was put out as part of the straw proposal in the spring, and we're now waiting for the final incentive program and siting guidelines to be put out as final rules, which I would expect, could happen before the end of this year.
Excuse me, we've got a little bit less than about 4 minutes, okay?
Perfect. So my last point, which should take less than 4 minutes, I also just wanted to flag legislation right now that's currently in play in the legislature related to clean energy. And again, Senator Smith, he's the man. There's a bill S-2978, which is about making the state's renewable portfolio standard more aggressive. We believe that bill, the senator's committed to have the target under that bill be 100% clean energy by 2035. So this is a very exciting, important step in New Jersey continuing to sort of up the ante and be more aggressive about clean energy goals. There's some technical, sort of fixes and changes to that legislation that we and others are advocating for. And I also just wanted to note that the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance and others are asking that bill be amended to, right now, incinerators are considered class 2 renewable energy under the RPS, and the legislation would phase that out in 10 years. And the EJA and others are calling for that phase out to remove incinerators from the RPS now, not to wait 10 years because of the impacts that those types of projects have on air quality and public health, and very often, more often than not, in environmental justice communities. So I will stop there, and hopefully I didn't use up all of my time.
Great. We definitely have time for some questions and answers. We do have a few that were raised, but as moderator, I'm going to kind of I'm going to jump in and ask you a question ahead of everybody else. So you had mentioned about that 8% threshold that we're sort of at right now with carbon sequestration with the state's forests. I'm just curious if any modeling has been done to demonstrate what the change would be with and without some of these forestry practices that we so desperately need to have in place.
Unfortunately, no, Steve. There's not a lot of data on these issues. And so I would say, and I think DEP would probably acknowledge, even that 8% figure is an estimate. And that came out of the state's Global Warming Response Act 80 by 50 report, where they laid out across, I think, 7 different sectors how the state could get to its, the 80% reduction in emissions from 2006 levels by 2050. So I think that 8% is a ballpark. And I will note that the state started earlier this year, the DEP started earlier this year, the development of a statewide land sequestration strategy, which I think would be a place where, we could get, some sort of finer scale type of analysis and thinking around how do we hold on to that? How do we not only not lose that 8%, but then actually get to that additional 33% carbon sequestration? But there's not a lot of data there really to help, sort of answer these questions at this point. It's a gap. It's a real gap.
Yeah. Well, I'm a numbers guy, and it's always nice to have numbers to then present to legislators, because then they can understand that a little bit better. But we do have some other questions. I'm going to read them. I'm going to start from the most recent question. We'll work our way backwards. But Louise Haberman had a question asking if there's any developers that are in the task force.
Developers. Not that I can think of, no. Robin
Blair has a question. Can solar be put on the mega warehouses instead of dedicating precious land for solar fields? No, I've heard that one a lot of times, and it's a really good question.
Yeah, definitely. And I will note there was legislation passed that requires new warehouses to be solar ready. And that's fairly recent. And I don't have a sense of what kind of impact that's having. Unfortunately, when we are seeing, a huge amount of warehouse development all over the state. And I'm not aware of any sort of data or assessment from the state or other parties in terms of to what degree where these new warehouses are being built, are they actually being built with solar? So being solar ready is one thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the solar is going to happen there. So I think that's a question we need to get a better handle on.
I mean, that's a really good question, and it's a really good use for a lot of that, roof space too. It's probably a win-win for those, that do engage in that in terms of getting energy credits, et cetera. We've got a couple of questions that actually pertain to Senator Smith. Cynthia Corman was asking whether if anybody knows if he's retiring from state legislator after the state legislature after 2022. I don't know if that's a question
Not
for us.
But... Okay.
And
let's hope not. We need him there as long as possible.
I know. He's been, he's been great in terms of promoting environmental causes. Another question on Senator Smith is from Amy Hansen from New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Whether or not Senator Smith is open to removing incinerators now from Class 2 renewables in the RPS bill.
I don't know. I've not personally been involved in any conversations with the senator on that issue, but I know it's something, again, that there's a big push on at the moment. And, we're certainly supportive of making that change in the legislation, and hopefully that'll get done. Okay, then final question for you. This is from Dennis Blazik, and this is another really good question. Has the Forest Task Force considered or tried to coordinate with DOD on reducing wildfire risks? And it's a two-part question. Second part, U.S. Navy funded DEP to create fire breaks near Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst over the last few years and planted Atlantic white cedar restoration on New Jersey land back in 2009. So, I mean, there's some of the, I guess, an added incentive perhaps for, coordinating with them on reducing fire risks. But any answer to that question, whether the task force has considered coordinating with DOD on reducing wildfire risks? We haven't thus far. I mean, we do have representatives from DEP participating in the task force. We don't have anyone from DOD, but that's certainly a good idea, and can take that back to the other co-chairs, and we can, try to seek, do some outreach to DOD. So thanks for that suggestion. All right, great. I know you're going to hang on for the balance, and we'll have opportunity later on to do a little bit more Q&A. So with that, maybe Deanie, you can boot up Ed's presentation. Our next speaker is Ed Patasnick. I've had the pleasure of working with Ed on a number of environmental matters, particularly stormwater management and stormwater, related impacts that we're experiencing statewide.
Probably most of you know Ed. He's a real New Jersey guy, and started off his professional career as a classroom teacher, teaching chemistry. He was the recipient of the Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellowship and served on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where he crafted policies designed to improve our nation's health and competitiveness. He's the executive director of the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters and who are the leading political voice for the environment. He's also a councilman on Franklin Township and chair of the New Jersey Keep It Green Coalition. So a very busy guy. So I'm going to turn it over to Ed without further ado. And Ed, I'll give you a 5-minute heads up as well. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. And I'd also say thank you to all the commissioners that are joining us today for the training. And then those of you who will be watching in the future. As Steve said, I'm Ed Patasnick. I'm Executive Director of New Jersey LCV. And my goal today is to give you a few updates on some of the environmental policies that we're working on this session and why they matter. And I'm trying not to cover things that the other presenters are talking about. So if you go to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit about who we are and what we do. So New Jersey LCV has sort of two main components. One is our 501c3 tax deductible entity, where we educate the public and lawmakers about important policies to protect our natural resources, our healthy and clean air and water, and preserve land in the most densely populated state for future generations. And then we have the logo on your left, which is New Jersey LCV, which is our 501c4. It can do all the things I described, plus it can also do a lot of accountability work and tell you how your elected officials are doing on the environment, and then the coveted endorsement process, where we can actually give somebody a seal of approval for their work in advancing pro-conservation policies in local, county, and statewide communities. We don't do anything at the federal level. We leave that up to our national partners. So that's who we are. I can tell you a lot more. Feel free to visit our website. But what I really want to talk about is something which is the next slide, which is New Jersey Pact. And as a quick refresher, Pact stands for Protecting Against Climate Threats. In 2020, Governor Murphy and the former DEP Commissioner, Catherine McCabe, issued orders that required New Jersey to start a regulatory reform effort to reduce air pollution and make our built and natural environments more resilient to the unavoidable effects of climate change. It was EO, or Executive Order 100. And what it did is it established a greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting so that we could see what our progress was towards the limits set forth by something called the Global Warming Response Act. And the goal of the Global Warming Response Act is to reduce the amount of carbon pollution we have in the atmosphere to 80% of what it was in 2006. So that's economy-wide. That's everything that makes carbon. And so that's a really critical piece. And then in addition, EO 100 established criteria that would govern and reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and other short-lived climate pollutants. So that is great. And then the piece I'm going to focus on today is the third sort of leg of the stool, which is integrating climate change considerations. So things like sea level rise into our regulatory and permitting programs. And this includes things like land use permitting, a water supply, stormwater, wastewater permitting and planning, as well as air quality, solid waste, and site remediation, and the permits that are given for those things. So while we waited for more of the New Jersey Pact rules to be released, the DEP announced in May that they would use something called emergency rulemaking powers to adopt New Jersey Pact regulations that would amend the Flood Hazard Area Control Act rules. So basically what this would do would be to redraw flood maps to match the bigger storms that are coming with climate change and raise our inland floodplain by 2 feet. And so this announcement came as we approached the anniversary of Hurricane Ida, which we just recently, I don't want to say celebrated, we'll say commemorated. Because if you're like me, I actually have neighbors who are still out of their homes because of Hurricane Ida. And, we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of Superstorm Sandy in 2012. And this would have been DEP's first emergency rule since Superstorm Sandy 10 years ago. But in response to the rules, there was a lot of pushback from the New Jersey Building and Industry Association and others, particularly developers. And they sent a letter to Governor Murphy, and they basically asked him to prevent these rules from going forward. So asking the DEP from taking immediate action. And as a result, the rules have been delayed. There is no date particular about when they might come back up. In the meantime, developers are scrambling to submit applications under the old rules. And the thing to just be aware of is the old rules put people in harm's way. The old rules make it more likely to lose your home or business. The old rules do like bury your hand. Let's pretend there is no climate change. That's the old rules. In Hurricane Ida, 4 people in Elizabeth, New Jersey died because they lived in affordable housing. They had limited mobility, and they're required to be on the first floor for that reason. Well, that's the floor that flooded, and we allowed that building to be in the floodplain. These rules would change that. They would save lives, they would save property. So it just makes common sense. And I'll just make one other editorial note. I've been pushing developers to say, well, how much does it cost really to build your foundation 2 feet higher? Or if you're, building a stairs, a couple more stairs. And I think the cost to protect from storms is a lot less than the cost to recover from the storms. We know they're coming and we need to be prepared. And that's what protecting against climate threats is all about. So if you go to the next slide, we could talk a little bit about the advocacy that we're doing. So environmental groups have launched a campaign this past summer, and we're urging Governor Murphy to allow the emergency rules to proceed. We testified at hearings, we wrote multiple press releases and op-eds, we had press conferences with local mayors, including the mayor of Manville. We created a website and engaged all of our members with action alerts. And then I want to give a big shout out to the Watershed Institute for their strong and tireless efforts to keep PACT at play and ensure that it goes into effect to protect our families. And again, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. And I'm hoping that we hear some good news around the rules for PACT around that anniversary from the governor and his administration. So that's a big piece, and it affects local communities and all the work you guys do as commissioners. If we go to the next slide, I can talk about something that you may not have heard as much about. This is the PACT website and some of the editorials we did. So one more slide from there. So we also have a number of legislative priorities. So that's the PACT rules are in the regulatory process, which means they're part of the Department of Environmental Protection. The legislative branch, which is the Assembly and the Senate, they are also taking up a number of pieces of legislation. Tom talked about the 100% clean energy bill that has the incineration in there. We want to get that subsidy and the allowance for that to be in there out as well. We're committed to that. But there's other legislation that's moving as well. And each 2-year legislative cycle, we put together a legislative agenda. And part of that is to figure out over the next 2 years, what are our 5 pieces of legislation that New Jersey LCV is going to be all in on passing. It doesn't mean we wouldn't work on other things. So our first agenda item, I'm pleased to announce, was an electric vehicle school bus bill that allocated about $15 million for districts to go from dirty diesel buses to clean electric buses. And so a big shout out as well to partners there, New Jersey Sierra Club, Environment New Jersey, and Charge EBC, which we worked with to get that bill across the finish line. But as we look forward to other common agenda items, we can see some other things gaining traction, including a low embodied concrete leadership act. And the bill number is A2234, and also Senate Bill S287. And this is the nation's leading concrete decarbonization bill. And it's really making New Jersey a leader in the low carbon concrete movement. And it's really generating a tidal wave of related bills in other states like California, Colorado, Illinois, Maine, New York, and Virginia. And basically what it does is it provides tax credits for the delivery of low carbon concrete and being used in New Jersey. And it encourages New Jersey concrete manufacturers to invest in a diverse and safe array of emissions reducing technologies as well, how you make the concrete. So we used a robust stakeholder process. We talked to the governor's office, the building trades and their contractor allies, business organizations, national and state environmental groups, the New Jersey Concrete Aggregate Association, and the bill received unanimous bipartisan support in the Senate, and I'm hopeful that it's going to come up in the Assembly. And if you go to the next slide, you know, we wonder, like, what the heck, concrete? Like, what, why? So here's what you need to know. It doesn't seem exciting. It's hard to say because people are like, what is it? But it could play a major role in reducing carbon pollution from the building sector. Concrete is the most common building material on Earth. And we produce between 30 and 50 billion tons annually. Concrete, along with its main binding ingredient, which is just ordinary Portland cement, is a leading industrial source of carbon emissions, and it accounts for 7 to 8% of global emissions, which is roughly 4 times that of commercial aviation. So think about that. All the planes, if you ever seen those maps, like, oh, zoom, 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 4 times that is concrete. And so given that nearly 40% of all concrete in the United States is procured through public projects like schools and the state, state procurement can be leveraged to build demand and a market acceptance for a range of safe, cost-effective, and climate positive low carbon concrete materials and production methods. And so that's something we're really excited about, and I'm hopeful you can be excited too, which will affect local communities. So if you go to the next one, we'll talk a little bit about pieces of legislation in our drinking water. So PFAS and PFOA, these are substances that are forever chemicals. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances is what they're known for. And they basically, so this is my chemistry teacher background, they're a chain of carbon molecules with fluorine atoms linked in there. And the thing is that carbon and fluorine form a really strong bond. And so nature doesn't break them down readily, and they persist in our environment. It is bad for us. And overall, they've been used in a lot of stuff. So stain repellents and textiles, firefighting foams, personal care products, water resistant and stain resistant clothing, carpets, furniture, paper coatings, all the way back to the 1940s. And, you know, because they don't degrade readily, that's why we call them forever chemicals. Those that do break down, it's very slow. And there's a total of 4,700 plus known PFAS chemicals that exist. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about what they're doing to us. As a result, they're accumulating inside of us. It's called bioaccumulation. They've been found in fish, deer, and other wildlife, and they appear in 95 to 97% of blood samples of US residents that have been tested. So basically, they're everywhere. And New Jersey has a disappointing legacy with PFAS. It was discovered in the early 2000s in the Delaware River. The New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has reported around 6% of the state's residents get their water from contaminated sources that have PFAS. And why are they harmful? Well, they cause all kinds of effects, including metabolism. They can harm a baby during pregnancy. They affect children's cognition and neural behavior and the development of young people. They also negatively impact our immune system. And of course, you're not surprised by this, they've been linked to certain types of cancer. And so I just want to flag a good thing. New Jersey was the first state to set an aggressive standard well below the EPA suggested levels of PFAS. And that's at set right now, and all the new homes that are being built or homes that are being sold have to test for PFAS and PFOA. And we've set that at 13 parts per trillion per PFAS, and then PFNA at 14 as well. For PFOA, it's 14, and these are low. If you do have it, if a water system has it, there are treatments that are available, and the state is helping with the cost of that. And that's a really good thing. If we go to the next slide, there's some legislative options as well. Fortunately, we're starting to see some federal legislation to combat PFAS. And obviously it's gotten nationwide attention. Congressman Andy Kim has been a leader on addressing PFAS, as well as Josh Gottheimer has talked about it quite a bit. But there is a lot that New Jersey can still do as well. And we're seeing our state legislators introduce a lot of bills this session to address the issue. And a number of groups like New Jersey Audubon and the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed are actively advocating for them. And we'd love to work with you as well at the state level. So let's take a look at them. One of them is a piece of legislation to stop PFAS and PFOA at the source. So the EPA suggests that the most crucial step in reducing PFAS concentration in our water, our soil, and our air is preventing its manufacture in the first place. So a bill by Senator Greenstein, and of course we heard about Senator Smith, it's S3177, would do just that. And then there's another bill similar, is S2712. And if you go to the next one, we can talk about that. So we get them out of the supply chain. It keeps them from out of the water. There are some other bills too focused on how we study and monitor. And so if we did regular testing, we would know if our water is contaminated, if we're increasing the amount of PFAS or PFOA, if it's remaining the same. I think going down is, that's for our kids probably to measure more than anything. So those two pieces of legislation, that's S3176 and S3178. There's also things we need to do to make the public more aware. And there's two pieces of legislation in that area, S3179 and S3180. So I'm hopeful that between state action and federal action, we can really start to tackle PFAS contamination at all levels. But we really have our work cut out for us. Particularly, different people get their water from different places. Some of us have a municipal water system. Some of us get it from a company. Some of us have our own wells. And in each case, how we handle testing and remediation, if there are high levels of PFAS and PFOA, differ. The good news is we're starting to get data on that because we're testing. Before, we were just ignoring it. And that was problematic, particularly in residential homes. So those are just like a snapshot of the many issues that we work on. And happy to talk more and take questions, but I'm just going to wrap up right there with those.
That was perfect timing. So, yeah, I mean, with the PFAS, and the PFNA, I mean, those are all significant contaminants that we're learning more about. I just read a paper just recently that was just published just recently about PFAS contamination actually being detected now in fish tissue. So kind of like documenting something that we knew, but now we're seeing data to support these chemicals working their way up through the food chain. So yeah, drinking water, big deal. I mean, it's also even more of a big deal because how do we, there's no really good way to remove those chemicals. I mean, at least economically and on a large scale from drinking water. So whatever we can do to prevent further contamination is a big deal. And then, as you said, Ed, I think there's also the need to do a lot of education, not only on that matter, but but it's one of them that's sort of like one of these problems that's on the horizon that people need to be more aware about. So
yeah. But one thing also to think about is I think a lot of people get scared about their drinking water, so they turn to bottled water. And, bottled water is tap water. I mean, we have in town a place that bottles water from our tap. So if you're buying the water that was bottled in our town, you're drinking the same water. So that's really not a long-term solution to reducing the contaminants. We want to trust our tap water, and you need to test it. And if there are things in there, they can be treated. But you're right, it's doable. It's not economical, meaning it's expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Robin Blair had a question for you about PFAS, whether there's, can we write out legislators to support those bills? How do we, get out a grassroots effort to support all those bills that you had just made note of?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you can do is you can go to njledge.org. The NJ and LEG, like legislation, so legislator, NJ, like the state, ledge.org, and you can look up your legislator, and there's also ways to then get their email addresses and contact them and ask them to be a co-sponsor of the legislation. And you can also schedule a meeting with them and tell a personal story if you have. I think outreach from constituents, voters in the district makes a huge difference, and it spurs action. I've seen lots of legislation that comes from neighbors or friends or community members that gets across the finish line and signed into law because of a conversation as simple as that. So very much we would love you to join our efforts on that or take your own action. That's why we kind of went over the bill numbers, and I know these PowerPoints will be available for folks as well. So yeah,
I guess a second part of that question was whether or not you guys have any language that those of us that want to contact our legislators by email or whatever could just cut and paste or customize that, as needed.
Yeah, I would invite folks to become members of our mailing list. If you go to, NJLCV, Lima Charlie Victory.org and sign up, we send out action alerts. I know you're probably part of Ancheck's, and they send out action alerts. Either way, there's usually quick links that link you up. If you're already in our system, we'll know who your legislators are. We'll pre-fill the text for you. You can edit it or whatever, and then you just click send and it goes off. And that makes a big difference when they get a number of emails. So yeah, absolutely. If you're already probably on Ancheck's list because you're here, you knew this happened. So that's like a big way. And they're very active. We work so closely together. They do amazing work. And you're welcome to join our email list as well. We do a lot of legislative activity and engage our members around it.
Mara Tippett had sort of a question and comment. This is pretty interesting that the Maine legislature, in an attempt to combat widespread PFAS contamination, has actually banned the land application of sludge, and asking whether or not if you're aware of any movement in New Jersey to do something similar.
No, but I can definitely look into it. And it reminds me of a piece of legislation that was banning the application of the fracking juices that they use to push into the earth so that we could use them as brine to get rid of snow. And I always wondered, why would we do that? I understand we want to ban it. It sounds terrible, and the truth is we do a lot of really weird things that just defy explanation. So you take a highly contaminated product like sludge, and you're spreading it or sprinkling it everywhere. That's the old way people used to deal with pollution. Steve, you know this better than mine. The solution to pollution is dilution.
Dilution, exactly.
Yeah, PFAS, you're not diluting it; you're spreading it everywhere, and that's would be a terrible thing. So I'll definitely look into that. I'll make a note.
But that's a good point, though. In terms of, because once that sludge is land distributed, then that opens up the opportunity for via precipitation for it to work its way back down into the groundwater, and then create further problems. I just want to make one quick comment, and then we'll move to Deanie. But at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about some of these unavoidable impacts that PAC is really looking to address. And just interestingly, it's more of a comment than a question, but I just did a 2-day seminar for Rutgers last week on urban stormwater management. And, one of the things that, as you know, I try to always like emphasize is that, yeah, the hurricanes, Hurricane Ian, Ida, Superstorm Sandy, et cetera, gets us sitting up and maybe a little bit more aware of some of these problems, or a lot more aware. But what we're really seeing is a lot of the smaller storms creating a lot of these localized flooding problems, and then also sunny day flooding of coastal communities because of climate-induced changes to sea level rise. So these are problems that are with us right now, and they're, we see them manifested even when we don't have these extreme events. So,
that's sort of a softball comment, because I would just do a plug for stormwater utilities, which would, if implemented, really reduce a lot of the sunny day flooding or the smaller storms, because we just have more concrete or pavement per square mile than any state in the nation. And because of that, water can't get absorbed like it used to. And so we need to mimic nature through green infrastructure. We need to fund these projects. Money is tight. A stormwater utility, if you don't know about it, Ancheck, we work together at New Jersey LCV with Rutgers. I know we've worked together, Steve, on this, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, New Jersey Future, and others, really encouraging communities to establish a stormwater utility and start to take control back from these rainstorms and protect folks in their current homes and businesses.
Exactly. And just a couple more quick questions here before we turn it over to Deanie. I think this is something that I'll let you, I know the answer to this, but I'll let you address it. Cynthia Corman wanted to know if the fracking sludge currently is where brine comes from, or is that, historical situation that's been corrected. So just put everybody at ease that the brine,
I think we
roads.
We ended up outlawing that. So I think we're good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a different type of brine. It's not fracking waste.
Oh yeah, no,
on
totally.
the highway.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just reminiscing. It's an 8 years ago legislative effort, but it's not the stuff they currently put on. It's like calcium chloride, which is better because it reduces the freezing point more because it has 3 ions. So I'm in my chemistry mode.
There you go. Good.
It's more focused. It's also more focused when they spray it, because salt, when you drive over it, the dust goes everywhere. The little pieces fall off the road. They melt the ice off the road. So by brining, it's more in the right spots, and it's actually more doing what we want, which is lowering the freezing point so that we can drive safely. So.
And my good friend Faith Teitelbaum wanted to, she made a comment that her town is drying dredge spoils on Green Acre land, and wanted to know if that's allowed. Honestly, I don't know myself. I don't think so, but Ed, do you? I think that would be a violation of Green Acre land use, but.
Yeah, I think sometimes people assume something is in a certain category and it really falls into another. I would imagine that activity needs to be permitted.
Right.
And that would be the first place to check. It's possible like a whole tract, 10 acres is Green Acres, and they're doing it on the part right next to it. So it can be a little bit cumbersome. It doesn't sound like an activity that would be allowable, but it's possible in a limited instance they gave a waiver or something.
Right, or that the dredged material has been, tested and shown to be free of contaminants, and it's being used as like a fill material or something like that. But yeah. So, all right. So again, thank you so much, Ed. And I know you're going to stay on, for a little while longer. And that brings us up to our last presenter for this session. Without, I have to say it's been a pleasure working with Deanie Chacko over my couple of terms on the Ancheck board. She is definitely a powerhouse and does so much behind the scenes, as so many of the Ancheck staff do. Deanie is the project director at Ancheck. She's had that role since 2012. She facilitates a whole bunch of different workshops and does a yeoman's work in terms of project management on various key environmental issues, particularly with plastic pollution and climate change. She's really been highly influential building a lot of these coalitions that we need and continue to need to strengthen our, positions on statewide plastic pollution reduction and the recycled content laws. She actually developed the website for NewJerseyNoPlastics.org and is a selected member on the Governor's Plastic Advisory Committee. And even though she's super busy, she still finds time to volunteer. She's a volunteer board member with the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Deanie. Thank you so much. And it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And for some reason, I've been doing so well sharing my slides and my system decided to cut out on me. Here it goes. Okay, great. Gosh, learned so much from Ed and Tom, and Ed gave the perfect segue into how when you reach out to legislators and you take local action, sometimes it works, and it definitely worked with plastics. And I am so excited to share, we're hot off the presses, that we are crushing it. That plastic pollution reduction law that just went into effect 5 short months ago. We're getting some information back from folks, primarily through the New Jersey Food Council, whose members are supermarkets and convenience stores, that on average, we are saving 688 million plastic bags and 13.7 million paper bags. And those are being eliminated from New Jersey's waste stream. I mean, I would just want to seriously applaud this. This is just phenomenal. So over the course of the year, I mean, we're talking billions of single use that is going to be out of the waste stream. So it's very, very, very exciting. So we want to also hear, what do you folks think? So we partnered with New Jersey League of Conservation Waters, the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. And back in July, because July is Plastics Free July month, we sent out a survey, and we were thrilled to have over 540 members respond. And for those that are on the call, and if you took the survey, we really appreciate it. And it shows here that we have extremely strong support for this law. So that's super, super exciting. We also asked about tips and tricks for remembering. How do you remember to bring your bags back? I know I use the second one all the time, which is I hang the bags onto the doorknob. For me, it's my front door. And as soon as I unload them, I put them back on the door, and then I'll remember to take them back out to my car. And one of my other favorites is definitely keeping a foldable, reusable bag in my purse. So I use that pretty often. And some other tricks. What else did we hear from this survey? One of the other questions that we asked was we asked, what else can New Jersey do to reduce plastic pollution? And these are some of the major topics that we heard back. The first one is focus on enforcing. So enforcement is an issue on pretty much every single law, right? But on this one particularly, the folks that are doing the enforcement, which are the DP for bags and styrofoam, and the New Jersey Department of Health for plastic straws, they need our help to handle the enforcement. So they need us to be the eyes and ears. And if you see problems, go ahead and report that to either your municipality or send an email to DP or Department of Health. So they need our help with that. But yes, agreed. More enforcement, and more enforcement is coming. Starting in 2023, I believe, the County Health Enforcement Agency, the CHAS agents, when they go out to look at restaurants, they will check for some of these, check for components to make sure that these restaurants are complying with the plastics law. There's a lot of talk about, would love to see New Jersey ban single-use plastic water bottles, improve municipal recycling programs, absolutely. Build a market for reuse and refill. We're working on that very strongly. And then figure out how to address the issue of grocery deliveries and the build of excess reusable bags. I am sure a lot of you folks have read the news articles where it sounds extremely concerning that there are all of these reusable bags that are coming back as when people order deliveries from home, and there's a massive pileup. So people are frantic about it, but I want everybody to take a deep breath, because it's not so bad. Only 2% of orders are affected. So it's a very small proportion of folks. And I want to throw that first statistic back that I showed on the first slide, that there's 55, that there are billions of plastic bags that are going to be saved over the course of the year. So, which is phenomenal. So Senator Smith, our amazing advocate, has introduced a bill called S3114 to help alleviate the concerns about the buildup of reusable bags. So this bill was just heard last week in his committee, Senate Energy and Environment, and it's going to have more conversation associated with it, but there will be, for a limited time and for just a limited amount of orders, will allow for single-use paper bags for home grocery deliveries. So there's more information coming on this, but hold on to that. In the meantime, if you do get groceries delivered through Instacart or through a delivery service from the grocery store like ShopRite, you can, under special instructions, request cardboard or just have a drop off. And if you do have too many bags, please clean them and drop them off at your local food pantry and shelter, because they still desperately need bags. One of the other things that you asked us to look into is making manufacturers responsible for the plastics packaging, and we are absolutely working on that. There's another bill that's pending, dealing with what's called extended producer responsibility. It's a really wonky name, not very sexy, but this is what it's referring to. And we're working with many partners, including Beyond Plastics, on this legislation. And it's going to do some of the things that are important to us, such as remove the toxins in our packaging, and make sure that it improves recycling and builds a reuse system. So there's going to be more coming on this, but the bill right now is S426. Again, the main sponsor is our wonderful Senator Smith. And this EPR legislation will require producers of packaging products sold in New Jersey to adopt and implement packaging product stewardship plans. And there's already EPR legislation in these other states. So there's definitely more coming on that. As far as the plastic pollution reduction law is part of it, there is a plastics advisory council that was established. And there's 16 members. I'm one of the members. And we have a lot of work ahead of us. So our job is to submit written reports to evaluate the implementation and the effectiveness of the law, make recommendations to reduce the use of plastics and the amount of plastic entering the environment, and increase the rates of plastics recycling. So how do we do some of this stuff? We are working to build metrics from and collect metrics from beach sweep data, from litter cleanups, and we're doing surveys to businesses as well as residents. There's a lot of activity going on right now with the Plastics Advisory Council. So as I said, we partner with DEP. We also partner with the Department of Health, the Business Action Center, and New Jersey Clean Communities. And that's what I have here. So thank you so much. I'm super excited on all the work that we're doing with plastics, and there's a lot coming down the pipe. So here are a couple of great resources for you. New Jersey No Plastics. Under resources, you could, under resources, you could find things that you can, flyers and such that you can download and use within your community. And then if you need more information or you want to get in touch with DEP, it's Get Past Plastic, and then bagupnj.com also has more resources for you folks. And that's what I have. So thank you.
Well, great, Deanie. Thank you so much. I do have a question for you that Paul has raised, and specifically his question is, I have gotten plastic takeout bags that say reusable bag on them, but they are not really reusable in a realistic manner. What is the rule on what can be caused reusable?
You got a bag that's reusable. Okay. So did he say a bag?
Let me read it again for you. It says, I have gotten plastic takeout bags that say reusable bag on them, but they are not really reusable in a realistic manner. What is the rule on what can be called reusable?
That's a good question. So the definition of a reusable bag under the law is that it has to have stitched handles and be able to be reused 125 times and be able to be washed. So that's the basic. And the DEP has approved bags made through something called ultrasonic stitched handles. And I have an example of that. This is one from, oh, you can't see it through my screensaver here, sorry. But this is through ShopRite. And I think that's what you're referring to there. They're very thin and they're made with ultrasonic stitch. So that means they're like heat pressed. So we are aware of that. And this is an issue that we did bring up to the DEP. So with those bags, we recommend that you do, keep track of it, keep using them, notify the DEP when you have problems with them, so they're aware and they are tracking this information.
And another question for you, and yeah, I've heard this criticism myself from Terza Warman. So first off, she wants to just say great presentation. Secondly, recently there's been criticism of the law, which also bans single-use paper bags. Mm-hmm. Any comment or insight on this?
Sure. So paper is not any better than plastic. It's got a huge environmental footprint. It takes a lot of water and chemicals and energy to produce. It's heavier than, it's heavy and it's expensive. So we don't want to be in a situation where we go back to paper, and the real response is moving towards reuse. So yes, paper is also an environmental problem.
Okay, well, thank you. And I want everybody to be aware that Deanie did this presentation today while she's trying to recover from COVID. So an extra pat on the back for being such a trooper and doing such a great job. She was really worried that she'd break out into a coughing fit during her presentation, but she's weathered the storm very well. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I still think we have some time to field any additional questions. If anybody out there has questions for our panelists, please feel free to bring those up. I'm going to make one more comment. I'd be remiss if I didn't let everybody know that is participating in today's panel that it is Jen Coffey's birthday. So if you do have a chance to reach out to Jen and wish her a happy birthday, I know she would really appreciate it. And again, as being one of the trustees, I can say that, without her, we'd be sort of like a ship without a rudder. So, thank you, Jen. And I want to express my thanks to both Liz and Deanie for all the work that they did in advance of this session as well. So with that, does anybody else have any questions for our panel?
I think we're all good then. Thank you, Steve, for moderating and doing such a wonderful job. And thank you, Tom and Ed and Liz.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And if anyone has additional questions you think of, please send an email to info@ancheck.org and we'll follow up.
Yeah, thank you. And then
And we will
Liz,
share the
how is,
recording with everybody that's registered. So you'll get the recording probably next week sometime, but look for that link. And if Ed and Tom share their presentations with us, we can also share those on our website as PDFs. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
thanks a lot.
very
Okay,
much.
bye-bye. See
Bye-bye.
y'all.